The Goblin Nation. It's a sprawling network of like tunnels and fortress cities ruled by cunning goblin overlords. Trade, trickery, and backstabbing are the way of life here, with countless factions vying for power through deceit and sabotage. It's all about getting up on the layer cake, right? Just kind of screwing over your fellow goblin to kind of get to the top. And so it's kind of a cutthroat like society where, it's each kind of goblin out for themselves. There's some kind of collective endeavor that kind of goes on, but for the most part, it's kind of every goblin for themselves. So it's kind of a chaotic like society, with all this kind of looking out for yourself mentality. And so they're kind of prone to easily being attacked. They're easily defeated because they're just not very well united. So something that your players can think about when they maybe get ambushed by a party of goblins, maybe your bard can kind of try to convince them to fight against each other or whatever. So kind of helpful, like little things there. So what I want to do is maybe pick something to kind of represent a goblin-like town. And you know what? I don't think there is anything specific for goblin. So if I type it in, it isn't. But what can take its place is orc. And so I can probably use some orc locations. And then some of them are fortress cities. So why don't we end up using some of these orc cities right here to kind of represent our goblin locations. So I'll bring the scale up a little bit to make sure that I get the scale right. Let's go up to 23. I think that looks good. Let's throw in one major city right here. This is like the major goblin fortress, and then we'll add in a couple villages. One here, and then we'll add in one over here, another orc village over here, or not orc, sorry, goblin village here, and then we'll add in some rando little buildings, little settlements here and there. There we go. And so now we kind of have our nation of goblins here that's set up. And to kind of give it a little bit more interesting feel, we could probably throw in some of these kind of bone-like arches. So I could throw in like this bone arch right here and throw in like maybe another bone arch. And then maybe this is a path that kind of leads from this area up into that location. So when I put down my path, I'll have a clear destination that kind of leads to this major one. And then you have all these other little tiny goblin locations here. So I'll take the path tool here. And what I'll do is I'll have the path, or the line tool, and I'll just gonna go underneath these locations, and I'll just go like that, and that kind of leads to that location right there. So now I have those nice locations there. And then what I might want to also consider is that I want to show that these guys have probably like cut down, like they're industrious in a lot of the ways that they kind of run things. They're warlike, and so they're always kind of like looking for materials to show that, that it's kind of that way. One thing I can do is throw in some dead trees. So if I type in tree, I don't think they're stumps, and you probably wouldn't even see a stump. But we can do is kind of throw in some like these kind of white snag like trees. So I'll just throw in a couple of these kind of white trees, and what this will also do is it kind of matches in with the same color of the bone, and so it kind of creates this color palette continuity because I've added in these pale like arches, and now I'm adding in these pale like trees, dead trees, and that should continue to kind of add and stick with the theme of what I'm going for here. There we go. So now I have some of that, and of course I might want to consider adding in just a little bit of white texture underneath my location here. Ooh, I like that. The bones of dead large monsters. Oh, I love that idea, Jonathan Frost. Great call. Oh, also, hi, Zoethar. Sorry that I missed you there. I wanted to say hi the first time chatter. Glad that you're here. Okay, yeah. So that goblin region, I think, looks good. I don't think I really need to add any more. I mean, you could add in those bones. I like that fallen idea, but there are no real skeletons. There's these bone-like decorations right here. We could use these to kind of represent the border of this nation. So I could maybe put a couple of these kind of like this. I can just take these very specific ones, place one here, place one here, place one here, place one here. And then now this line of bone-like things right here kind of represent the border of this goblin nation right here. So that kind of works well. Now, we could use I don't really want to go too far out of the style, but there are some fantasy regional skeletons that could work here, like these ones right here. So if you wanted to show that maybe there was the skeletons of dead creatures. Like, for instance, one thing we could add to the lore here is that these goblins worship these long dead creatures that lived here, right? And so what we could do is put some of these skeletons kind of hanging out on the rocks. I'll bring the saturation down a little bit, and we'll add in a couple of these kind of skeletons. And this is one way to kind of represent, like, hey, these are the bones of their gods kind of floating around here. So I think that's one thing that we could do here. So if you want, you could add that in there. This is in the fantasy regional style. It's not in the fantasy world style, but it's kind of one thing that you could do in there. I do like that idea a lot, Jonathan. So I think I will kind of throw those in there. So good thinking on your part, by the way. I like it. Good idea. So we'll throw in those bones. It's okay. I think that when there is a contrast, like when you're using a stamp from Fantasy Regional and you're putting it in Fantasy World, there is an inconsistency in the way the style of the stamp, shadows, the line work. But when you're working at this scale and it's this small, I kind of feel that the inconsistency is a little harder to see. So at this scale, it works out okay. It's just when you start getting into the much larger scales, because remember, Fantasy Regional is at a much larger scale than Fantasy World is. So once you start scaling up Fantasy World stamps to Fantasy Regional size, the line work starts getting wonky, and then vice versa. When you start scaling up or scaling down Fantasy Regional and they start going down to Fantasy World, you'll notice that there is a line consistency thickness. And so you just kind of have to factor that in when you're adding stamps across styles. Okay? Okay. I think that region looks good. One thing I might want to consider doing is maybe just throwing in a little bit of red on the ground, I think, just to kind of add a little bit more continuity to the ground thing. So I'll go into Fantasy World and kind of look for a reddish, like, ground texture. I think this one right here, this kind of brown wasteland, looks okay. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of place some here and there. A little bit of red there, a little bit of red there, a little bit of red here, a little bit of red there. And that should kind of finish some of the continuity. So now we have